hunters, it is a privilege. And I think that one of the things as Indigenous people, I'd like to have those conversations or see those conversations be brought forward.
Today's guest lives in a small coastal community in British Columbia and has both Indigenous and non Indigenous heritage and lived experiences. In Canada, Indigenous hunting rights are constitutionally protected. In this conversation, we explore how her lived experiences have shaped the way she thinks about those rights and the conversation surrounding them. More broadly, we talk about identity and how the communities we grow up in can influence how we see the world. This is the Every Person Podcast, conversations with ordinary people about how they see the world. This project is an experiment in what it looks like when two people slow down and think out loud together. I'm 85 Urban Ontario, and I go by the handle Learning Out Loud.
We're joined by 62 Small Town BC, who goes by the handle Ocean Living. She works in healthcare and is a mother of grown children. She wanted to talk today about identity, and specifically her experience as being someone whose heritage is both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Ocean Living, thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and the communities that shaped you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, initially I was uh, grew up in with a in foster care on the West Coast, and in a non-Indigenous foster care family, and then moved back to live with my natural mother in the interior of BC, where she was from. And
And what age is this around?
uh, lived in the lower in Vancouver until almost 4, and then from 4 to 11 lived in the interior of BC.
And you'd mentioned that your foster care was non-Indigenous.
Correct. Yes,
It,
it was. Mhm.
is your mother Indigenous?
Yes,
Okay. And what about your father?
non-Indigenous.
Non-Indigenous. Can you tell us a little bit, or can you think of a moment when being both non-Indigenous as well as Indigenous felt especially clear or complicated for you? An example.
A clear meaning, clear as I clearly understood. I was not Indigenous enough, maybe, would be when I was with my family on reserve, my mother's family and my grandparents and cousins and uncles and aunts. Um, I never, it was never pointed out to me until there was a disagreement. And in disagreements, my views differed from theirs. So then I wouldn't be Indigenous enough or have that same um, kind of lineal perspective that they would viewing, and that I wouldn't be looking at the world through their lens. Nor would I with when I was with the non-Indigenous communities, just regular city life, small town city life, and in my community off reserve, um, with school friends and playmates that were non-Indigenous, then I would also feel not um, not not white enough. Not I wasn't I walked a line that was in between.
Let's stick with your off reserve friends and city life, you had called it. Can you think of an example of a time in your youth and maybe roughly how old you were of when you felt not white enough?
Not white enough.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, school. First days of school, and and arriving with a mother that is clearly Indigenous, and my 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 skin color was could easily be passed off as non-Indigenous. So then arriving with a mother that is clearly a Native woman would be, yeah, then I would clearly, um, school kids would say, it was the 60s, your mom's an Indian. And yeah, so, and then as kids do and kids fight, then your mom's a squaw. So then you really identify and feel that sting and that sense of protectiveness, protection that you want to put toward your mother, and that anger and shame and that goes along with singling out that you're not quite. You might come to the same school as us, but you have a you you're half Indian.
Did you know other people who were also mixed Indigenous and non-Indigenous?
Not many off reserve. Most of our family were on reserve. So um, typically, from what I recall, if people left reserve, they just went south. They went to another reserve. Mm. So reserves people move to other reserves or into um, to the city. Um, and those moves to the city usually weren't good moves. It wasn't like they were going to the city. Not many of them going to the city for education. It would be usually a not a lateral transition. It would be a downward transition if they moved to the city. But if they were laterally moving anywhere off reserve, would be to another reserve or to the states. The states are close enough that many uh, people traveled down and um, and worked down in the states and took their families with them, and then would come back.
You mentioned that moving to the city would be a downward transition. What does that mean?
It would be that they wouldn't be moving to an affluent area of a large city. They'd be moving to not to any place of affluence. They'd likely be moving to inner city and projects. Beautiful. If even that. Having a smoke. So, um, yeah.
And okay, and then so you told us a little bit about the anger, protectiveness, and shame that you felt at times in a non-Indigenous setting. What about in an Indigenous setting with your Indigenous family? Can you think of an example where being part Indigenous and part non-Indigenous felt especially clear with your family?
Uh, when there would be mention of, say, my my just who I was, who my father was, would be he's a white guy. That would, yeah, he wouldn't be given a name. He was just a white guy. That came first, name after.
What did it feel like to have somebody who's a part of you be referred to in that way?
That and that they were separate, but somehow things were very compartmentalized. And this is even the stepfather, a wonderful man that I had. He was still, um, if in reference to him, it would always come up that, yeah, he's a white guy.
So this is your stepfather, not your biological father.
Yeah, yeah, and it was, yes. And if question came up about my biological father, just he was a white guy.
As well as your foster father.
as well as my stepfather.
Pardon me, your
Right.
stepfather.
Yes, he was, even though he was a friend amongst them, he wasn't they he was known amongst the family and well thought of. He was still a white guy. He was separate.
And how has this been able to hold both of these identities and having these various experiences based off of the different contexts that you're in and people that you're with? How has that shaped how you see perhaps Indigenous issues? For example, why don't we take a clear example? Are you okay to talk about maybe land issues or hunting? Which would you prefer?
Mm. The hunting the hunting issues I think are I think I would like to see changes in our legislation to change and make hunting um, not a right, but to have hunting rights and to put it all under the same uh, word as not a right, but a um, a privilege for all uh, citizens in Canada. That it may have been a practice and traditional hunting grounds of First Nation people and Indigenous people, but I don't view it as being a right rather than a privilege, because the world as we have it now, we have the opportunity to uh, most of us get our where does our meat come from? It comes from the grocery store. It's a privilege to have um, venison and this now, where before it was a sustenance, a staple. The venison for first for Indigenous people as well as white settlers that came here. It was what was practiced. Um, so, and I don't see it as, I think that if it were a right, it would, or pardon me, if it were a privilege, it would bring this animosity toward between the white and Indigenous people to an even playing field where the animals that they harvest, where they're concerned, the animals, okay, they'll be harvested. Well, maybe Indigenous would have a reduced rate, because in British Columbia, hunters have a rate that they have to pay to have a just a hunting license that isn't for the animal they want to harvest, just a hunting license. And I think that if Indigenous also had a hunting license, um, that would make it a privilege to have a license to do that. And maybe in BC, non BC residents pay significantly higher amount to have a hunting license, the privilege of hunting and harvesting in British Columbia. The big game hunters, any out of province from neighboring Alberta, you have to have a hunting BC hunting license to hunt here. Then there's the depending on the year and the population that can be harvested. There are lottos, people that are non-indigenous. They get a lotto to to be able to have a tag for a moose.
Okay.
And
And none of that applies to Indigenous people.
no,
Okay. Did you grow up hunting?
I grew up in our family hunt. Yes,
What does that mean? Do you have an example of what that might mean?
there was always moose, typically moose. It was the favorite, but or deer hanging in the shed, in the open shed. There would be an animal. Typically, it was very uncommon to not see when you know, and that would fill deep freezes, and when that would deplete, there would be another animal hanging in. It was something that the men did on weekends.
Do you still have Indigenous family living
Yes,
on reserve?
yes,
Do you still keep in contact with them?
yes.
Do you know if they still practice they'll still practice having
Well,
moose or deer in sheds?
absolutely. It's where you hang them.
And what's your understanding maybe of what they would say of whether this is a staple in their house for their food if they're still doing this versus going to the grocery store?
They how would they feel? That they feel it is their staple. It's always been something they've been able to readily do, but they can readily do it. It's my opinion that what would be different to readily still go and do it, but acquire a license to do it.
Okay, so you're saying that you grew up with a practice of hunting in your family, and
Mm.
your family, your Indigenous
Uh,
family on reserve, still continues to hunt as they did when you were little. And
I don't
what,
think, let me correct that. I don't believe that they hunt in the same fashion, the same, that is where most of the food will come from. That it's as much a privilege for them now to get that as it is to non-Indigenous people to be able to hunt, and because not all Indigenous people can afford a truck to go up, and it's expensive to hunt. Um, Now, they to go up the mountain. Not many people walk in and walk out and bring their harvest out on their person or by sled or whatever. Um, People go in with vehicles, and that's how people hunt these days. I think that they are able to. They also shop at the grocery stores. They have access to grocery stores. Um, I think that those on the reserve likely have, I guess you're, now that you are asking me to think about this, I actually have less easy access to a grocery store as, say, people living in a city or nearby community, but they have every much access as somebody else who lives in the country. And other non-Indigenous people who live out of city and out in the country, they have to go. Uh, they have to find a way to get their groceries as well.
and when you say that it's expensive today, the way that we hunt today is expensive, would that have been true when you were little as well, or when you were growing up, that
Well,
hunting
that
was expensive?
gasoline's always cost. I just recall that people would, family members would get in the truck, and whether some were riding in the back of the truck and some were riding, luckily, in the cab when it was nice and warm in on those cold mornings, because hunters typically would leave the house at around 3:30 and go up the mountain and be back by breakfast with um, their harvest, and start to uh, you know skin and prepare the meat.
That's a fun memory. One that I think a lot of people can't really relate to today, being either in the cab or the back of the truck. Is that a pecking order thing? Or do you flip a coin?
Yeah, it definite pecking order. Seniority gets the warmth, and and otherwise, there weren't the restrictions of seat belts and safety concerns. Guns today are not transported that way. There aren't any gun racks at the back of the window. The unfortunate part of riding in the cab is going over the bumpy roads. Your head's always going to hit the guns on the gun rack, and um, that was just the part of the trucks back then. We didn't have extended cabs. They were just single row seating in the truck with that had room that had a gun rack attached behind the seat against the window, and your head would hit it all the time, guaranteed.
So for somebody, so it sounds like what you're saying then is, does it feel like hunting is more of a hobby that supplements sustenance today? Or,
Yes,
and don't let
for
me,
indigenous as well.
and for Indigenous as well. Okay.
Yes,
And you're saying that because of this shift over the past decades from a staple to perhaps this more privileged activity that you're able to do when you can afford things like a truck and gas, um,
a rifle, ammunition. Yes.
right? Um,
Very expensive.
that it is feeling less of a quality of a ancestral right and
Yes.
more of, like you say, a privilege to harvest animals in this way that everybody in BC partakes in if this is something that they partake in.
Yes. Hunters, it is a privilege. And I think that one of the things as Indigenous people, I'd like to have those conversations or see those conversations be brought forward.
And how does your view, holding both of these identities, inform your opinion on this, or does it?
Because hunters, whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous, uh, it is their Zen. It is they are there's a it's almost a religion. The hunters are not out shooting bang bang. It's not a Western movie. Hunters are deliberately they're it, their process of harvesting animals is very highly regarded amongst them, and there's a strong etiquette, and they all feel passionately about it, Indigenous and non-Indigenous.
Do you think that other people with Indigenous ancestry and lived experience hold a similar feeling to you on this issue?
I don't think so. I believe that uh, there is a feeling of what was taken. I believe there's a strong thread of feeling of what was taken, and so we're keeping this amongst a lot of in indigenous communities. That's what I feel, and that's what I notice. My families or friends and families, that this is our right. You can't take this from us. This is part of who we are. And I'm asking that can we look at who we are? Is this really a right we need? Do we all do it? I know I know of that a lot of hunters will bring back to the community and share with some of the elders their harvest. And you hear of stories of people filling uh, a, a small little deep freeze for an elder. So they are sharing the harvest, and that's awesome. Um, uh, as I say, it costs a lot to fuel these big vehicles that go up into for hours. You're thinking you're gone for 4 hours at least, 4 to 5 hours, and uh, that's a lot of and up into mountainous terrain, and just the vehicle and everything. A lot of elders, they can't hunt anymore, or people that aren't of that don't have those resources on reserve to go and hunt. They have to hunt at the grocery store. So um,
You had mentioned having a perhaps discounted rate for Indigenous people on the hunting license. Is that perhaps, and I don't want to jump into your worldview on this, but is that perhaps because of this
I did.
informal tradition of sharing harvests, especially with elders?
Yes, and yes, exactly, and it is like I know that the hunting practice are taught on many reserves of how to harvest and how to process your harvest, and that was something that was just, well, you had to do it as a child, or the boys did, you know, or the girls that were inclined, um, but and now it's being taught to youth so they can see, well, this is what used to be done, and they have these courses. I believe First Nation is one that does that. They have courses for the youth to attend to learn how to make drums from the hut to skin and process the harvest, and then process the skins to the point of having them ready to use, manufacture how you want, whether it be drums or clothing or what have you. So those, I think, are important. I think that is something that is showing the ways of how things used to be. I think that it would be nice if they're showing Indigenous and opening that up to non-Indigenous, because there's a lot of youth that are non-Indigenous that would like to learn those old ways as well. And I think by having my perspective of both Indigenous and um, non-Indigenous heritage, I think that to bring kids together and show it's becoming a way of what used to be. And
You hear people often talk about the importance of reviving some of these traditional practices that
mhm,
were severed for systemic reasons,
mhm.
like hunting practices, processing skins, that type of thing. What about somebody who might say that in order to revive our traditions that were, like you said earlier, taken from us, it's important for us to hold on to this right? What would they be missing?
Well, what would they be missing? They would still have the opportunity. They would just have to pay for the privilege. So the opportunity is still there. Wildlife management, not coming from a perspective of, I don't understand the environmental wildlife conservation approach or methods, but I think that harvesting wildlife, and as it's moving, also wildlife is beginning to move into, as we move into the wildlife habitats, we are moving in, our populations are reaching further and further into their habitats, making and encroaching on them, and they are coming into um, our settled areas, whether remote or in our remote areas, animals. And so teaching how to, manage uh, rifles and that, I think those are important things to keep for those that are in those areas. But I guess what I meant by having a license, Indigenous license, meaning that um, Indigenous as the first people still need to be a Canadian and pay for the privilege, pay a ticketed price, and BC residents still pay for a price for this um, license, and then again, um, uh, the rates for non-BC residents are highly increased as they are coming from other areas to harvest these animals on our land.
And you
Um,
mentioned indigenous
province.
on the province land.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
You mentioned Indigenous as a First People are still Canadian. What do you think? We've talked a little bit about hunting rights, but just Indigenous rights as a broad category, what do you think of having distinct rights for Indigenous people as the First People of Canada?
I I believe that the I think it's important to ask what are the rights as First People. There, I believe history wise, yes, they we were there. My ancestors were First People here, but um, I don't know that. I think it has to be something that is recognized, and in these are the First People. I'm happy to see that before, when I was a child, recognition of First People, the language, all of it was stifled and shut out. So in today's world, we don't see that. We see stop signs that have the local community's language on it. There are bridges and monuments named after first, Indigenous names and areas. I think those are important to give value to the people that were here first, whereas before there wasn't value there. When I was growing up, that was laughed at, and it's still laughed at today. We have our new Patella Bridge, which many people refuse to acknowledge as the new name for it, which I'm still learning to pronounce myself. But Stellawasson, I think it's called, but I'll work on that. Uh, and it's always been the Patella Bridge, and it has a right to be an Indigenous name bridge as well. Is my opinion. It was given the Patella, and but in it's that way even in small communities. I lived in a small community that had a corner that was called, and that was named to, and people only, the older people, they clung to the one name, and both being the same, just like the Dees Island Tunnel and the George Massey Tunnel. Two different names, and people will refer to it as whatever they want. But some people won't refer to the Patella Bridge by the new name simply because it's Indigenous, and they don't want the Indigenous aspect in their minds crammed down your throat, crammed down their throat.
I'm going to come back to that point because you had mentioned animosity earlier, and I want to come back to that. But before we do that, you had mentioned that the Patella Bridge is renamed to an Indigenous language. And I'm not going to ask you to name the community that you're from in the interest of anonymity. But it's important, I think, to appreciate that in Canada, there is no such thing as a pan-Indigenous individual, and communities and languages are quite distinct as you go within a province and across the country. What do you think about naming conventions that are in another Indigenous language that might not be the language from your community? Sometimes that's some of the criticism that gets put for these naming conventions, that it's challenging even for Indigenous people to pronounce or understand, even within a community that might have that language because of a minority of that community or speakers of that language. But then as you extend it out, of course, languages are different.
Right. And it's like that, as I was saying, in a non-Indigenous community, just in a small town community, renaming, or in a big city community like the Lower Mainland, renaming monuments or bridges or places brings change, and people naturally do that, whether Indigenous or not.
Where have you seen animosity crop up between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people? You've mentioned one where you have people who are non-Indigenous having resistance, it sounds like, to adopting an Indigenous name. Do you have any other examples of where you see animosity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous in your life?
Hmm, that's a good question. Oh, it's the Stella Wasson Bridge. I just wanted to clarify that um, is the new name of the bridge that's been newly made. It's a newly made bridge. The old patella is being taken down, and it's a good thing. That was a dangerous bridge. Do I see other areas where there's animosity toward Indigenous?
But
Uh,
yeah, but between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and I guess specifically towards Indigenous, like you said.
would hmm, healthcare, there used to be animosity and more or openly, and there can be in uh, animosity toward the Indigenous coming in. It's animosity toward, I guess, people repeatedly coming in, because the Indigenous population would more so, the ones that would find themselves in coming to seek healthcare services, were because of their lifestyle practices. And that would be a lot of, if there was drinking involved, there would be injuries involved. And those would come in, and sometimes that was a frequent every weekend there is, or every payday, there is a high population of Indigenous coming through the doors with injuries from drinking, and uh, and the mental health that goes along with the instability of alcohol, and those practices. And um, nowadays, Indigenous are given a break from that, because our society is alcohol, and the mental health fractures, I believe, are from alcohol and drugs, lifestyle, that are bringing it's not just Indians that are coming in through into healthcare with mental health crisis injuries. Now it is all people of all.
And help orient us a little bit. I know you work in healthcare. Is this something you've seen, or are these stories you've heard?
Seen and stories, yes, and
Okay.
just practices of how it just always has been,
Okay.
and now we're changing. And and healthcare now, uh, doesn't just if there is animosity toward people who are not doing things for their health, but rather re-injuring themselves, it is a practice that is would fall under a mental health and those related things. And that used to be something that would just be indigenous. If there was drinking, well, that here comes an Indian person into hell into the emergency, and they are coming in because what have they done?
You work in healthcare. Are you seeing this attitude today?
No, not no, no, because you see healthcare, you see the frustration of dealing with the futility and the sadness of people suffering in mental health, and those aren't just Indigenous anymore. Those are uh, those are all walks of life, all races.
The way that you phrase that specifically towards Indigenous people sounded quite, I think it's fair to say, prejudice towards Indigenous people. Here comes another uh,
And that
Indigenous.
was, yeah, that was, yes.
When you say that was, but it's not anymore, orient us in time. When was that in time?
In the last 20 years, in
Okay.
the last 10 years.
Oh, wow.
All these things have been changing so rapidly due to our information age and our awareness and people putting forth things like truth and reconciliation and making these awarenesses uh, and also our landscape of of society has been changing and eroding. The heavy drugs um, are taking a toll, and it's showing what and making people live on the outskirts. Again, it just goes to show when we don't have people that are living with amongst us, but that are living off to the side, um, like
On a reserve, perhaps.
yes, or people that are unhoused and living off to the side, there's still that segregation, that us and them, and the people that are feeling that, and however they get there.
So when you create an us and them situation, I'm going to come back to the hunting license again. You have one segment of the population that have distinct rights protected under our Constitution to hunt. And then you have another segment of the population that has to pay and go into even at times a lottery for certain hunting licenses. Um, that creates segregation. And you had originally used the word animosity in that instance.
Yes,
Is
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, is this leveling of the playing field that you think would be an antidote to this animosity that you have experienced in the hunting context specifically?
I think that it's necessary going forward. I think that it's more than just a leveling of the playing field. I think it's necessary to help the bring to lessen the animosity toward each other. Whether it's this is everything was taken from us perspective to you Indians get everything for free and we have to pay. Why do you get it for free? And that is all part of the, like, I think that truth and reconciliation and reclamation has been so successful now that we have bridges that are being built and named in, as with the old patella and the new I always have to look up this thing because it's not coming to me easily. But the new Stella Watson bridge is um, to get to a point where there is, okay, how do we move forward with your, as Indigenous peoples, um, and non-Indigenous peoples? And that's not even touching on the land rights or anything. It's just one of the steps, I think, for moving forward. Where, okay, truth and reconciliation has moved mountains in, but and that's so positive. But what else can the Indigenous do to step into it? I think there needs to be something of what they can do to come to the table.
Do you think that your experience as both an Indigenous and non-Indigenous person and living in both of those contexts has shaped how you view this conversation
Absolutely. Absolutely. The love of your family on both sides.
and the how do we move forward together?
Yes. Yes.
So you had mentioned on the one side, truth and reconciliation, which is ultimately government driven, and that the government
Hmm.
identified the
Hmm.
necessity for that, but
Hmm.
then Indigenous led, and
Hmm.
to uh, in order to actually actualize how that happens. You've described that as being successful, and then you've also described that the Indigenous people need to step into the conversation.
Right. I think that it's been successful in giving for Indigenous people a voice that didn't uh, that was not allowed before. It just wasn't. It's not even allowed. It was just rejected. Social norms wouldn't have afforded it any credibility, and now it has that, and that's good. So now that we're here, let's keep moving and start entering conversations. And the tough conversations are where do we what I think a conversations a conversation would be what are our rights, traditional rights, and what are our responsibilities as Canadian citizens.
What would you say to an Indigenous person that doesn't necessarily identify as a Canadian citizen?
Well, I would ask them to think about that. That many don't. They see it as Canadian and American. Those that move back and forth over the border um, see it more as one and don't see it as Canadian. But then that but they follow Canadian rules. They follow the Canadian. Uh, what part of not being a Canadian do they want to release then? I guess is what I'd like to know. What part would you like to let go of? The uh, the would you like the Indian Act to be gone? Would you like what do you not see as being a Canadian citizen?
You had said earlier that on two sides of that you get everything for free, and on the other side, everything was taken from us.
Yes.
There's a
There's two sides. That's a strong, that it sounds so strong hearing it from you, but that is very underlying thought forms on both sides.
there's a big gulf between those two understandings of how the world is shaped.
Yes.
For people outside of a conventional structure. So, what Truth and Reconciliation, I understand you saying, has done in a way is provide a platform. So, a structure for Indigenous voices to be heard and to be uh, live to be heard and accepted.
Validated. That's right.
Aside from
Incredible.
Aside from formal structures, how can an Indigenous and non-Indigenous people every day hear each other more when they're coming from such diametrically different sides of this conversation when we're talking about these tough conversations on rights?
Start with what they practice and what they do, and one of the things is hunting. It's a
What do you mean by that?
Well,
Can you
start
elaborate?
uh, to talk about how we can come together as Canadians on the topic of hunting.
Okay. So choose a topic and start to work through it, it sounds like.
That's right.
Interesting. And what do you think? We've covered a lot of ground today. What do you think is important for somebody to take away from this conversation?
To there's a lot of work to do, and there's the tough questions, but tough questions are asked and worked through and answered all the time in life. And um, moving into those tough questions or those opportunities to learn from each other are part of living and part of being here as Canadians and as part of global participants. And I think that it'll be strengthening, and it'll go from us, them to a us
And if some
eventually.
and if somebody listening agreed with you quietly, perhaps, but has never said it out loud, what would you want them to understand?
I would want them to understand that as Canadians, we need to um, value and learn from our past, and except as we do in Canada, we are a multinational country, and we accept and embrace other cultures far more than we've ever accepted uh, First Nations. This is a new thing to be in these past. It's a new uh, thought form or consciousness as Canadians to be accepting the First Nation. Before it wasn't. It is. We've accepted European cultures and South Asian cultures and Asian cultures, all cultures of the world, and much more readily than we have our own Indigenous cultures. So I'm asking that if I would think of anything is uh, consider that and give it a little leeway that this is new and it's an exciting time to be a part of how to make things make a history that we can be proud of going forward.
Being heard and accepted as an Indigenous person is new?
Considering that, yes, I think that other cultures coming into North America and Canada have been accepted much more easily and broadly than our own First Nation Indigenous culture.
Right. And you're born in 1962. You
Correct.
told us a little bit about your identity at the beginning. In an environment that's charged and often driven by identity, how do you define and identify yourself today?
Mm,
Not as a category, but more
good
how do you
question.
identify today?
Well, my looks um, um, show that I have Indigenous. I'm happy that and I wish that my mother and her family didn't have the pains they did, and likewise in my life and in my children's lives. But I see that those shape us. And as part of the, my husband's families, they're European, and they had their sadness from war and war torn countries there, and so I think that myself being a identifying myself as somebody who is a grandmother who is Canadian and has Indigenous ancestry, as well as European British ancestry, and part of the whole melding pot of Canada. And it feels good to know that um, on my mother's side, the ties to this area of the world go back centuries. That gives me some relief that I'm not just floating around, because with the Indigenous there's a whole floating transient thing, but we have been here for centuries, not in the organized manner of Europeans, but on my mother's side, those people, my ancestors on that side, have a long history in Canada, or what we call Canada, as Canadians, and before it was Canada, there were people of our DNA here.
And let's end on this question. When we're having these tough conversations and coming from different perspectives, how can we leave those conversations hearing what each other are saying and maintaining the relationship and working toward, as we work through tough conversations and work towards a general shared understanding?
That there's enough to go around. There's enough land. There's just enough. And let's work out how we're going to organize that enough.
Thanks very much for being here, Ocean Living. Certainly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
The people in these conversations are ordinary individuals who have volunteered their time and honesty to think out loud with us. I have a great deal of respect for the willingness to work through ideas together, and I'm grateful to 62 Small Town BC, who goes by the handle Ocean Living, for taking part. If something here made you reflect on your own views, that's exactly the spirit of the project. And if you have thoughts, well, you're welcome to share them. Thanks for being part of the conversation.